Okay, for this option, you are going to close crop a figure. So again, it's your choice for your grade. If you want an A range, you can do both. If you want a B, you can do one or the other. So this option is for the figure. You can use this figure. So I put here a link to this image. Or you can use an image that relates to the subject of your hidden career project. So I'm going to grade you on how accurately you've learned to use the tools. Make sure that when you upload it, you upload both the original and the edited images, and only upload PDFs. Make sure that you add a couple of sentences describing what you learned or found confusing or frustrating. Okay, so that's what, make sure you read the instructions. This is what it's going to look like in the end. So this is the PDF, and this is the finished Photoshop file with the cropped figure, the shape behind it, and the attribution. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get started. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open the image here, and you can see here that I have saved the image with all the attribution information that I need. It has no title, so I called it Untitled, and put out a little description to it too, just to help me remember. And there is the full URL. If you paste the URL in and you get an error, it's because, at least on a Mac, you're not allowed to have a colon in your file name. So if you paste http://unsplash.com, just delete the https:// and just put in the URL, because that works. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open this. And what we're going to use is we're going to use this tool here called the Quick Selection tool. And the Quick Selection tool, what it does is it uses Adobe's artificial intelligence to identify what the subject of the photo is. So it usually does a pretty good job. And we're going to take a quick look here to see what that looks like. You can see the marching ants showing a pretty good selection. There's obviously some changes that we'll want to make to this, because this artificial intelligence is not perfect, and it's going to make some mistakes that really a lot to do with the details that bring this image to life. So I'm just gonna look at a different view of this that allows me to edit the selection. So that is called Select and Mask up here. I'm going to click on here, and you can see right away that there's this overlay. So this is the view that I have. Your view may look different. This is the view that I prefer, so this is the one that usually defaults to, but there is a few here. You can actually see one with this transparency grid. You can see one where you're just seeing the mask. This is the one that I prefer. It's the one I'm used to. Very traditional way of describing a mask. And one thing that it shows me really easily is it shows me the places that Photoshop has missed. So the hair tends to be one of those complex areas that Photoshop is doing an amazing job of, but it's not perfect, and there's some fixes we can do to it. The other thing here is in the glasses. So adding transparency to the glasses will really bring the image to life. So you can set your view mode here. You can set the opacity of the mask too. So depending on the image you're using, usually tend to set it at about 50%. Depending on your image, you may want to look at a different mask. And you can actually change the color of the mask, which can be helpful too, depending on the color in your image. This will affect the actual selection itself. So this really softens the edge. Here you can see that it adds this kind of ghosting look around it. By default, this is usually set. Let's just go ahead and look at what that's set at by default. By default, yeah, it's set at 0. So that's pretty good place to start. So let's go ahead and look at some of these areas here that could use a little bit of help. Usually in these areas here, the selection tends to be a little bit rough, a little bit harsh. And that's because Photoshop is doing a really quick job of guessing at the beginning and not paying a lot of attention to details. And you can see here, it missed some of the hair here, and it missed some of the spaces here. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use this tool called the edge. See if the tooltip pops up, the refine edge tool. So the refine edge tool, basically I'm telling Photoshop, look at this area here and see what you think. Maybe you missed something, and it'll look at it a little more carefully. So there's adding and subtracting, and you can switch between adding and subtracting by clicking on these buttons here. This is a long way to go up. It's a lot faster to use your option tool, and here the icon's very tiny, but you can see if you look really carefully that it's changing to a negative when I hold the option key down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask Photoshop to look at this area here and see if it finds something different. And if it doesn't, see, it picked up some of the hair there, and that is actually going to be helpful in describing the image. And if it doesn't pick it up, what you can do is you can switch to, and sometimes it does a bit of a brutal job. So what you want to do is switch to a smaller brush size. Again, it's something we can change up here, but we can get the same menu down here right beside where we're working if we right click. And I can double click to select the value, and then use the up and down arrow keys to change the value. And that allows me to actually see the brush size right on the image itself. So super useful. You can see that's 2 pixels. And if you look at the pixel grid here, it looks pretty close to 2 pixels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, what about that? And sometimes with this stuff, I think Photoshop has done a pretty good job, but sometimes it's going to refuse to look at it. And so another option that we have is to go in and actually manually add some of these in. I'm not going to do that now, but the way you would do it is by using this tool here, which is the brush tool. So if you actually find some pieces that you actually want to say, look, I want to make sure these are added in, you can do the same thing. Just and add them in there like that. And these little details can make a huge difference. And just, you know, you don't want it to look like this figure has been cut out. That's very old school. So when we used to do stripping with film and, you know, an X-Acto blade, so we would actually have a sticker, like this big layer of film that was red that the camera wouldn't see, and we would actually put it over top of the image to close tool it. We couldn't get this kind of fine detail in there, but now the possibilities with Photoshop is incredible, how we can actually do this. So here you can see it starts to add in some of this texture here, which can really start to bring the image to life. So don't want to leave little pieces like that in there. So you want to go back and make sure you add the whole thing in. one thing it can be useful to do is to soften your brush so it's not quite so harsh. Maybe even go quite a bit softer. And doing this kind of work with a mouse or a trackpad is actually very labor intensive. If you do have access to and you like doing this kind of work, this kind of detailed work, and you have access to a stylus, like a little Wacom tablet, it can actually be can actually make a really big difference. Much easier to work with that. So I'm just trying to bring in some of these. Here. And here you can see we can actually start to work with the bigger brush to bring in some of these. There. Photoshop does a pretty good job of picking up on those if we ask it to look at it. So this is looking a little bit rough, so you want to go back and soften it out. So this can take a lot of refinement to get it exactly the way you want it to look like. But definitely worth the time. Spend a bit of time on it and figure it out. Figure out exactly how you want this to look, and just keep softening it. Okay, I'm not going to go and work it all out because I don't want this video to go on forever. But you know, figure out how much time you have to spend on this and set a timer, spend that much time on it, and try and like use the time to really learn how to use the tool, because that's really the objective here, is not to get a perfect image, but really learn how to use the tool well. So I would go in and fill in all these areas here where Photoshop missed. Bringing the background through the hair. Okay, that's really rough. Spend some time and get it right. So once you're done with the selection, you're going to turn it into a mask. But I want to do one more thing before we go in there and create our mask, and that is I want to take a minute to correct this lenses here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the brush tool and change the size. I'm going to start a little bit large. So one thing you can do is one thing you do to make this better work a little bit better is sometimes you want a straight line. So if you click in one spot and then hold your shift key down and click at another spot, Photoshop will draw a straight line between those areas. So that's a trick to getting some nice straight lines in there. The light is bending a little bit, so that arm of the glasses isn't going to be totally straight, but it's going to look right if it is. I'm going to delete some of this. So again, the Option key just gives you the ability to switch quickly between adding and subtracting, and pretty powerful. Makes this tool a lot more powerful. So I'm just going around here quickly, kind of rough, and I can brush this out afterwards. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Going to go like this. So pretty amazing, non-destructive. I'm not losing any pixels at all. By doing this, my photo is totally intact. Nothing has changed. Okay, and when you're trying to draw into the corner, just drawing past it and then erasing is going to give you a better corner point. Do the same thing here. Here, once we get to the edge with the face, what can be helpful here is just to draw over it a little bit and then ask Photoshop to find that edge. Just fill it all in and then ask Photoshop to look at this edge here for us. See what Photoshop thinks. You see, it does a pretty good job of softening that edge so it's not quite so, and you know, finding all those extra, you know, little variations and filling it in for us so there's no like white gaps. Okay, I'm going to delete that. So I think that's looking pretty good, and you can see one thing that's helpful when describing glasses is that it does bend the light, and so if you can exaggerate a little bit how much light it bends, right, because you don't know this person's prescription, but if it bends the light more, you'll see that the lines on the inside of the glass are quite a bit different than the lines on the outside, and that can actually be helpful for adding that effect. I'm just going to add more of that. And it almost gets into like painting here, where you're actually painting with pixels. So it can actually be very beautiful. You're actually, you know, creating this effect. So that's looking pretty good. We're gonna modify this a bit in a minute. But what I want to do is take our selection. So once you've fixed all of this hair work and you've checked all of this down here, what you're going to do is you're going to output this to a layer mask. Click OK, and you'll see that now this is no longer a flat image. The background layer is now floating, and I'm going to go File, Save As. I'm not going to save it in my images folder because this is a working file, and I'm going to call it Andrew 22.3F. close cropped, or close crop, close tooled. Close cropped figure. And I was calling it 2 because the first one didn't record, so I've got to do it over again. And I'm going to save it as Photoshop file. Go ahead and save. The next thing I want to do is I want to get rid of this area down here because she was leaning against the wall, so her shirt's ballooning a bit in the back and it just looks a bit weird. So I'm going to take the crop tool and take the crop tool. Sometimes when you grab the crop tool, you're going to get something here. If you have set a ratio here, you won't be able to crop it properly, and it's going to be super frustrating. You won't know how to change it. Just click on clear, and that way you're going to end up with you're going to be able to do your own size, right? So I'm going to go escape, and I'm going to do that again. Just crop. Okay, so one thing to look at here is, look at the ratio. Look further along here, because what you want to do is look at this thing that says delete crop pixels. So if I select that, when I crop this, Photoshop will delete everything that I've cropped out. You don't want to do that because that's destructive. It's going to make your working file a little bit bigger, but it does give you more options later for editing if you leave them. So I'm going to leave them in. I'm going to double click to crop. If I do this again, you can see that those pixels are still there. So I can double click to crop, or I can click on this check mark here. So that applies it. That's looking pretty good. What I want to do now is I want to draw the shape layer. So I'm going to add another layer, and I'm going to call it shape. And then I'm going to rename this figure. And on this shape layer, I'm going to take my elliptical marquee tool, and I'm going to draw a circle. Again, I'm holding the shift key down. I'm holding the option key to draw from the center. Shift key to constrain it as a circle. And if I let go of the option key, then it's no longer drawing from the center. I want a nice big circle. I want to fill it with something. But what I want to do is I want to fill it with a color that contrasts with her color of her clothes, so it contrasts with this blue. So I'm going to select this blue. Find the blue in here. So I'm using my eyedropper tool to select a color. Blue. Then I'm going to click on the swatch. This opens up the color picker, and I am going to go to the hue value, and I'm going to subtract. So minus 180. Click OK, and that gives me the complementary color to the blue, the opposite on the color wheel. So that foreground color now is the color that I want to fill the circle with. I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and I'm going to fill it with the foreground color. So this is foreground color, background color. I'm going to click OK. So that, so I'm going to deselect. So I'm going to take my marquee tool again, click outside. Now I have most of what I want. I want to modify these glasses a little bit, but I'm going to save it. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the attribution information. So I'm going to copy it from my file name. I'm going to take the text tool, and I'm just going to click here in this space. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to set my alignment to flush left, and I'm going to paste. This is the typeface that I usually use, which is IBM Plex. Again, if I want to make sure that you are using only a simple sans serif or a serif. And so you can choose these here, so you can look at all the sans serif typefaces or all the serif typefaces. So I'll let you choose there which ones you want. But make sure you're only using a simple serif or sans serif typeface. So try and avoid these ones that are very condensed or have a very or all caps or rounded. Just go with a very simple serif or sans serif. And I'm going with IBM Plex sans medium. Want it to be legible, so I'm going to increase the size a little bit. Let me try 48. I'm going to take the move tool, and what I like to do with these attributions is make them vertical, and that kind of separates it from the main content of the image, but it's still accessible. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go here to edit and free transform. If I go around one of the corners of this object, the cursor changes to a rotation tool. So I'm just going to rotate it, and I'm holding the shift key down to constrain it, and there I get 90 degrees. From there I can just click and drag it to the corner. And I'm hitting enter to apply, but there's also that check mark at the top. I'm going to save this again, and I'm going to do the one last edit here that I think really brings it to life, and that is bringing a reflection back into these glasses. So here you can see, if you look at her glasses, the color behind the glasses is a slight shade different, and that's because there's a reflection. All the light doesn't go through the glasses, and that's helpful for making these kind of things a little more realistic, so they don't look like they're cut out, they look more real. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go here to our mask, and we are going to edit the mask. So I'm going to turn this mask on so I can see it, and I'm going to just zoom in here like this. And what I want to do is I want to select this area here that we've already selected. So I'm going to use the lasso tool, and I'm going to click around here like this and just make a very broad selection here. And again, once I get to the end, I'm just going to double click, and that'll give me my marching ants. And I'm on this figure mask here. So what I want to do is I want to go over the thumbnail like this, and if I go over the thumbnail, you can see that the cursor changes to a hand. So that allows me to select that. What I want to do is, when I'm doing that, I want to actually hold down the command key, which allows me to load that selection. I don't actually want to load the whole selection, I just want to load the part that intersects with this new selection that I've made. So I'm going to hold down the option key and click, and that selects the intersection of the two, so that I'm getting that part of the mask that I've spent all this time creating, and that's it. That's all I want, but I want it selected accurately, and that allows me to choose that part of it. So with that selected, I'm going to fill it again. So I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and this time I'm going to fill it not with 100% black. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. I'm going to go OK, and you can see that. Turn this off. What it did is it made the mask so it's not 100%. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at this here at our layer, and let's disable this layer mask. And you can see here that it brought back some of this reflection that was in the original image. Let's see what that looks like in the image when we look at the whole thing. So let's turn off our channel, and let's double click on the magnifying glass to zoom out. And let's click somewhere with the marquee tool to deselect. And you can see that really, it changed the image. It makes it look a lot more realistic. So glass can be very tricky. I'm going to make the glass work on this optional, so it's, it counts for a higher grade. So you don't have to do that, but I think it's worth, if you like this kind of work and you want to do it well, those two things go hand in hand, doing it well and liking it. So taking the time to learn how to do it well will actually probably lead to you liking it more, and it'll greatly improve your work. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Find this composition's a little bit not quite centered, not quite off center. It doesn't feel very comfortable. So I'm going to move these two over, and I'm going to do that by selecting the shape layer, holding the shift key down, and selecting the figure layer, and just dragging it across. I'm holding the shift key down to constrain it. And yeah, I actually kind of like that. So I'm going to save it. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Save a Copy. I'm going to save it as a Photoshop PDF. I'm going to delete the word copy here. And I'm going to leave the layers on because I have this preset I can use. And here's G157. This is a modified one. But let's go ahead and select this one again. And that deselects preserve Photoshop editing capabilities. For some reason, it's setting the image quality to low. But if you want to actually fairly high quality, and we're going to go ahead and save the PDF. And let's take a look here at our final PDF. And please do this every time you create an image. Take a minute to look at so you can see that even on high quality, it's actually a pretty compressed image. And there is our Photoshop file, and there is the final PDF. So go ahead and submit it and tell me what you learned, what you liked, or what you